Hi. I always giggle at the beginning, to be fair. Hi, and welcome to another installment of If It's in the Mind, It Can Be Managed, the Mind Management Mentors podcast. Today, we're going to be answering the question and asking the question why leadership isn't in a game. Now, I know today's guest. I met him very briefly at a fantastic event I was last week. And first impressions count. And Cheryl, I'm not the best at that sometimes because I'm like a bull in a china shop. However, you walked into the room, poised, professional, lighting up the room. And for anybody on first impressions will go, that lady's got her shit together. And then there might be another judgment of, well, she doesn't know about struggle. And that's the conversation that we're going to have, because what we present to the world and how we get to that place of being able to hold that space can be a battle sometimes, like the inner game of tennis that we can often play. So I'm not going to say anything more, but we're going to deep dive that story of why leadership isn't in a game. So Cheryl, introduce yourself.
I will do. I will do. Now, I'm going to start this by saying I have had my computer in a workshop and my sound does dip in and out. So sometimes I'm going to sound a little bit like I'm underwater, but that just makes it even more fun. So you're going to fill in the blanks with what you think I'm saying in those moments. So let me tell you about that day. Let me start there. I'm not going to tell you who I am and what I do because I think that is the most boring way to open up a conversation because we all do that. And I do like to push the edges and do things a little differently. So I'm going to tell you exactly what happened in that room. So I went into that room, and if you're a professional, it was a room, it was a networking room. If you're a professional, so let me go back slightly. For me, a leader is just someone who identifies as a leader. So you might be a leader as a business owner, you might be a leader because you work in corporate. Parenting is nothing but leadership. So leaders are just people who are paving a way forward. They are going first, and as such, people follow their lead. So I'm talking to you as a leader. And we have this impression of leadership, that it is a title. It's who we are. So if I was to say, "Hi, I'm Cheryl, I'm a leadership coach," that's why I don't start there. Because what I do is irrelevant. Leadership is an inner game. We're going to unpack it. So I walk into this networking room, and like most people, if I were to say to you, right, you're going to go into a room, you're going to have 60 seconds to introduce who you are, then I want you to just think in your mind what it is you would say. This is how you would introduce yourself, and you would say, and you would have something maybe a little rehearsed, maybe something you've said a lot. You're going to tell people how you can help them, maybe, or whatever. Or you're going to present the best side of yourself. So just like you, I walked into that leadership room and I had something I was going to say. And then when I got in the room, there's a piece of paper and I wrote the date. And I looked at this date and it was a date that I knew. And I had this, oh, and all of a sudden what I wanted to say completely changed. So I'm going to tell you the story of the date. So the date was the 30th of July, 2025. But I went back in my mind to the 30th of July, 2008. And on the 30th of July, 2008, and Cuddy's done a beautiful thing where he said, I walked into the room, poised, professional. Like without knowing who I was, you would have had an impression that I was a leader in some capacity because that's how I hold myself. It's how I carry myself because honestly, it's the truth of who I am. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a past, that I don't have things that have happened to me. So on the 30th of July, 2008, I was actually an inpatient in a psychiatric hospital, which I could tell you so many stories about that time, which are far more interesting than my story, honestly. Um, and so, well, okay, why was I in a psychiatric hospital? So then we want to go back 3 years before that. So 3 years before that, I was doing well in my life. I had studied psychology up in Aberdeen, and I was about to start a nursing degree. And I decided to have a really fun time in between those two things. 2 periods of study, I actually really wanted to go and have some fun. So I'd gone on a holiday with a girlfriend over to a Greek island, and then I realized that actually I could work out there. So I took on a bar job out there and had, quite frankly, the most phenomenal summer. I was 20 years old. I would cycle around the island, like I hired a little bike from somebody, I would go kayaking and exploring the little coves and discovering new beaches and all these things. I've watched the world's most amazing sun to this day. Like I've traveled all over the world, and some of the most beautiful sunsets I ever saw were sitting on a Greek island. And then I would work 4 or 5 hours in a bar serving cocktails to tourists. And that was my life. Like honestly, I didn't really want to come back and do my nursing degree. But life doesn't give you everything you want. It definitely throws you some curveballs. And so 3 years before that, or in those 3 years before I ended up in psychiatric hospital on that Greek island, I was followed home by a local, pushed his way into my apartment, and he beat me and he raped me. And I then did what most successful people do. I went, nope, that didn't happen. Let me just go get on with my life. So I had a period initially after it happened of being angry, hurt. Like I was mad. Like I took a lot of that out on my family. There was like I'd never really experienced anger before in any real way. And there was like real raw anger would come up. Fear, doubt, worthlessness, like I mean you name it, it was going through my head. But the day that I joined the matriculation queue to start on nursing, I stood in the queue and I just went, yeah, that didn't happen. I'm on a new path. I'm doing something new. Let me go get my nursing degree and let that just be a distant memory. But the brain doesn't work that way. And anyone who's ever experienced trauma will know that it will find ways to leak out. So throughout my 3 years of study, it found ways to leak out. I had things like eating disorders. I used to have moments of having like what you would call flashbacks. Like I would be lying in bed and all of a sudden I'd be back in that apartment in Greece and I'd be like, but I'm not there. So why do I feel like I'm there? And all these periods of feeling like I was completely crazy. I felt completely worthless. At the time I was in a relationship with someone who was a really, really good human being, and I traded him for someone who displayed kind of like narcissistic behaviors and all these kinds of things because my self-worth was so low. Now, it's really easy to talk about it from this perspective years later with so much insight into it. But at the time, I didn't know that I was doing things to protect my brain. To me, it was just, I was just moving through life. So 3 years of, you know, fighting through the things that were going on in my brain, I literally took a decision one day that I didn't want to do that anymore. Walked to my bathroom cabinet and took every tablet in it. And that's why I found myself sitting in a psychiatric hospital. In that moment, there was actually some relief because a psychiatrist sat in front of me and said, it's called PTSD. It's a real thing. It happens to lots of people. And all of a sudden, what I'd been fighting on my own that had me feeling like I was crazy was actually a real thing. So somebody was actually saying, like, it's okay. It would be like if you had like physical symptoms and you feel like you're going mad, and then you go to the doctor and they're like, no, no, you have something and we have treatment for it. So there was this period of relief. My story then goes on for almost 15 years of going back and forth with that. But again, Cuddy, you're completely right. Somebody can walk into a room, I might look a certain way right now. That doesn't mean there's not stuff going on behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you for it. It's that I know when we spoke for those few minutes, and I I'm very open, honest when I say, and I just think to be fair, people are cunts, and for everything that you've gone through, it does annoy the shit out of me, and for what you've gone through and those challenges, and people really don't know what's going on in the background, do they? To be fair, people make snap judgments.
Mhm.
I've done it. I still have the propensity for snap judgments, and I still slap myself around the wrist and like, Denny, judge someone. Don't judge the book by its cover because it's just never. You really need to get into the story, and that's literally what we're going to do. So, well, that's a hell of a journey, Cheryl. It's a
It is
hell
indeed.
of a journey.
Mm.
And I think for anybody listening and watching this now, because it's always visual with the podcast, is we want people to sit here and go, wow, Cheryl Smith walks into the room, lights it up, poised, professional, badass in every part. And it's possible for everyone to go through the atrocities of life and to go through learning? Because we talked a little bit about you did therapy, but you found life coaching more beneficial. So we're going to touch on that as well. So can we deep dive that 3 years of the more sabotaging your life until you got to go and see you got admitted to the
The
psychiatrist?
hospital.
Yeah, to the
Yeah,
hospital.
yeah, of course.
Were you just not aware of? I always talk about the inner conversations. I think if we can become aware of our inner conversations, we can start actually going, oh, that's maybe where I am, or that's the emotional state that I'm in. I know that when my internal talk is a little bit more resentful or judgmental, I'm like, right, I'm in a disempowered place. I've got a possibility now to bring that back. For anyone that's going through, because I think people are scared to talk about that internal conversation because it's batshit crazy for a lot. It was for me. It's batshit crazy for a lot of people. They're like, oh my God, am I the only one having these conversations? But what's the kind of internal conversation that Cheryl had for that 3 years of pushing it down the side, not dealing with it? What was that internal game of tennis for Cheryl?
Yeah, good question. And do you know what? It's very easy to talk about it from this side of it. Had you asked me that question in the moment, probably wouldn't have been able to tell you because self-awareness is an evolution. So in that moment, in those 3 years, I wasn't particularly self-aware. Now, I was because I think anybody who is intelligent in their life, and by intelligence, I don't mean that you need to be book clever. Like I happen to be intelligent as book clever, but anybody who's kind of got any kind of either IQ intelligence or emotional intelligence has a degree of self-awareness. So what I'm going to say was going on for me now, I can articulate really well. But had you asked me in the moment, it might have presented differently. I'm going to try and like maybe I should say like this. Behavior is a communication. So where back then I didn't have the words, what I did have were behaviors. And now I can put words on it. So if there's somebody listening to this who's going through something, what I say might sound like, well, that's how it occurred for Cheryl. But I also want them to know that had you sat me down in a conversation like this in those 3 years, I wouldn't have been able to speak about it in this way. This has
Yeah,
come from years of excavation, right? So I'll talk about the behaviors. So um, the behaviors presented like I had an eating disorder. So now I would later come to learn that that was a way of controlling. So something had happened to me that had me feel very out of control. And anybody who's ever experienced that, and it doesn't need to be that, but any abuse of any kind, right? We all think we would behave a certain way, we would do a certain thing. Like I froze. I tried to talk my way out of it, and then I just gave up the ghost on it. And we do this all the time. If that ever happened to me, I would do this, and it's just total BS because you don't know. Like your body just goes into kind of like a shutdown. And from the moment that the assault was over, the behaviors in me began. So the first thing that happened was I ran to the bathroom, locked myself in there. This man was trying to convince me that like there had been permission on my part, right? So I have this man talking to me through the door. Like you'd think you would scream or you would raise an alarm or whatever. I was in shock, right? So and I remember seeing this like bottle of bleach in the shower. I wanted to wash myself in bleach. And honestly, at that point, my thought process was that it was my fault. Like it's like I didn't see him as wrong. So that also played into why you don't raise an alarm. And it wasn't really until I started sharing what had happened that other people informed me that this was wrong. Right. And you hear this a lot. Like this is a narrative, like there must be something in me. Now, if you think about it, that is pure wisdom because we cannot control other people. You can't, like, you walk down the street, like, if somebody decides to just, I don't know, elbow you, you can't control that. But what you can always control is yourself. So we're like biologically wired to protect ourselves. So, of course, this is why victims blame themselves, right? Because it's wisdom in a way, like, oh, I can control myself. So everything in me was like, what can I do to control myself, control my experience? So from there, I was flown home. I was interviewed by the police. It was a horrific process, but there were so many. There were moments of what I would call like I'm going to say things that don't sound light, but they're really light. And I'm going to give you an example, right? So when I was flown home and into the police interview, I was taken to a safe house, right? And I've seen all this on the telly, and I didn't know that this is what actually happens. But basically, you go into the police station, you report the crime, and then they take you to a separate location. And it's always a house, and it's a house because it feels like home, because it's safer to share there. You're medically examined, all of these things. And I remember I was sat in the kitchen waiting for them to set up all the recording equipment and stuff. And there were these toys in the corner. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, I am 20 years old. This is possibly the hardest moment of my life. Like, I'm literally going to have to tell a story that I do not want to tell. But there's someone here who plays with toys who's had to do the same thing as me. And the survival in me was like, this could be so much worse, right? So again, all of my behaviors are like protecting myself, like telling myself stories that don't make the thing that happened okay, because it isn't okay, right? But were helping me to make sense of it in a way that would make me feel whole again, right? So I get through all that process and I come home and I become literally obsessed with my weight. Now, I have the genetics that when we look at cakes, we just put on weight, like we don't even need to eat them. Like it's really unfair, right? But I started to control my weight. So I would go on diets, I would like really crazy diets, like 20-year-old women, you're bombarded with images of what beautiful is. And so I was like, if only I could get to a certain weight. Now, I would later come to know that that was all about control because I could control how my body looked, right? Again, at the same time, so for me, it presented as a bulimia. So I would diet, I would starve myself, essentially. I would last so long doing that, and then I would dive headfirst into like, and when I say I would eat anything, I mean like I would eat like packs of butter. I would just eat and eat and eat. And again, I can tell you now that the mind story was one of I wanted to be in control, but the minute I started to look a certain way, I didn't feel safe because I had a story that I was assaulted because of how I looked.
Mm.
Because this man while I'm in the bathroom is like, you can't come to this country and look like that and dress like that and be like that and not expect this to happen to you. So the minute people would say, you're looking great, Cheryl, like even now, right? Like, and I've done years of work through this, but even now when people say you look good, my first thought isn't thank you. It's I'm not safe. That's the first thing that comes into my head. So it takes me a minute to then go, oh, this is coming from a safe place. Like you said, like you walked into the room, poised, elegant, whatever the words you were. But like to me, that will occur in my mind in a different type of way until I can sift through the noise. So I'm going through eating disorders. Um, I'm also going through what I would call like really, really low self-esteem. So, you know, I was never like a really outgoing person. Like people find that really hard to believe. I'm actually exceptionally introverted. I spend most of my time on my own and I love it that way. But people meet me, they think I'm very extroverted because I'm very confident and articulate. But actually I prefer being by myself. But I had such low self-esteem, but I also was intelligent. So I knew, I guess, how to present myself to the world in a way that nobody would know what was going on behind a closed door. And this is a real leadership quality. Like I worked for in the NHS for ages, and it's like, I could be in an emergency situation, and my inner dialogue was one of like complete pressure, and I have no idea what we're going to do, blah, 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 blah. I would be poised. I would be like, it's okay, we're going to be fine. Let's just work through this. And in my head, I'm thinking like a swear word, right? Like, no, like this is awful.
You
So
can swear,
exactly
it's
the
okay.
yeah, I do swear a lot, but yeah, I would be right. So, but the same thing was going on here, where to the outside world, I was a normal, like, by the time I did my nursing degree, I was like 21 years old. So I was going out and I was meeting people and I was all of the things and probably looked like I had my life together and things were good. But actually, my inner dialogue was one of like, the world isn't safe. There is something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. And worse than that, again, like at the periods where I would really be broken, it was like, I'm disgusting. I'm completely unworthy. I'm unlovable. There would be moments where I would do things like I had those mirrors in my house that came with the house. So they weren't like my mirrors, they were just like built in. And I would literally pin sheets. Like it was like I would maybe get dressed and I would look in the mirror like you do. And a lot of the time I'd be like, cool. And then other times this switch would go on in my head of like, you're horrible, you're disgusting, you're whatever. And I would go and I would literally pin sheets over the mirrors. Like really, really kind of crazy behavior that I didn't understand why I was doing. Now, if you had asked me in that moment, Cheryl, what are you thinking? The thing is, I wasn't aware what I was thinking. I was behaving. Now, think about trauma and think about difficult things. When you experience a trauma, you literally revert to being a child because somebody has made your world unsafe and you don't feel like you're in control of that. So you're not showing up to life like an adult. So when we see people, you know, react to us, like push back on us, get angry, like engage in behaviors, like all that's happening in that moment is the person isn't actually aware of what they're thinking. Because if they were aware of what they were thinking, they wouldn't act through those behaviors. So it's very easy for me to sit on this side of it and say, I
Yeah.
felt worthless. But the reality is, I would just look in a mirror and be like, you're disgusting. And I would just put a thing over it.
Yeah.
Or it's not safe. Let me overeat. Or I need to control. I wasn't aware those were the things I was thinking. And this is where then when you get into therapy and coaching, you start to realize there are all these, I call them mind stories, but they're narratives that are literally running your behavior
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
So that's
Thank
where
you.
that was. Mm.
Absolutely. So there was a question popped up for me to ask now.
Mm.
Are you okay with mirrors now?
Yeah, I love mirrors now. And sometimes I'm a woman, right? And in fact, never mind a woman, like man, woman. Like there are days when you get up and you don't like what you see in the mirror. Like that's just life, right? But yes, no, I'm fine. Like to say I've healed from that 100% would be a lie because that's not a thing. And I think anybody who's trying to pursue having complete healing is you're going to be playing such a long game. It's going to really be difficult for
Yeah.
you.
No, that's
Um,
absolutely fair. Yes.
but what I do have is so much awareness around it now that I can kind of see what is and isn't going on for me.
Do you have more glimmers than triggers now?
Um, so I create my life. So I feel happy every single day, but that doesn't mean I am happy every single day. So,
Very true. Yeah.
right. So I live a life of complete gratitude. I think if you are somebody who's gone to the level of depression that I have, it almost doesn't make sense for me to go there. But that doesn't mean that I don't get triggered by things. It doesn't mean, like this weekend, actually, I had a really emotional weekend and I had to just I just had to be with them. But I also feel blessed most of the time. And, a big, massive part of it, Cuddy, is actually that I have completely forgiven the person who hurt me. Um, I have very much come to the understanding that hurt people hurt people.
Mm,
So I don't condone the behavior. I don't think it's okay to do that to people. I don't misunderstand what I'm saying. But nobody has ever hurt me in my life, and I have never hurt anybody in my life without acting through exactly what I was saying. So, you know, those behaviors that I was, beating myself up with were behaviors because I didn't have awareness of my thinking. Exactly the same is true over there with that person. The difference is his was projected outward onto somebody and mine would be projected inward onto me. But there's no difference between those two things. So there has to be an element of forgiveness. And I cannot forgive myself for the choices I made because I did make choices. I still do. Like, you know, full transparency. Like when I get into a relationship, I'm not an easy woman to be in a relationship with. I'm the most loving, giving, Like, like I will support my partner in ways they just didn't even know they needed to be supported. Like I'm a successful person. I admire success. Like I'm a ride or die. But equally, I can be very triggered in those situations because of the things that have happened. And there's still a part of me that's still working through that.
Mm.
So I will, when I'm not thinking about it, react and I will act and it will be a behavior. And then I have to go and clean it up and sort it out, as we all do. But that still plays out for me. Like it's not like, you know, I, I don't want anyone to ever think that you're going to get to some destination where these things don't play out in you. Of course they do. Like it's in your body, it's in your nervous system, and you can do all the inner work in the world. The best place you're going to get to is just to have such great self-awareness that you can see what's running the show and then you can go and make it good. That's the best place you're going to get to. Like in the same way as like, like I love like, listening to people who've been through AA because you can be 32 years sober, you are still an alcoholic. So I am still a victim of trauma. It does not matter how much my life changes and shifts and shapes and how successful I become. That is still a part of a mind story that will be in my mind. And I just need to be careful of when I move through the mind story and when I move through what I'd call the highest version of myself.
Yeah. So now all the life coaching stuff's coming out. Yeah, no, absolutely. So Cheryl, can I just from my perspective to you,
Mm,
because I'm big into language, and I just you say I'm still a victim of trouble. There's nothing for anyone watching this because
mm,
there is and once people go on that personal development journey, they'll understand about victim mindset and the higher self and moving up the states of consciousness, so that when we start giving out to the world, we get back and we get out of that blaming. So it's how you worded it, and I was like, wow, that's fascinating because there's not one part of you or the conversation that you said that would indicate that you are a victim of trauma. You've had trauma and you've
mm,
learned to deal with. So there's nothing about you that for me, and just me listening, I'm like, nah, Cheryl, there's nothing about you that's a victim of trauma.
mm.
Whereas we know that there is a lot of people. I've just realised my background is because the sun's shining out there, so my background's gone a little bit strange. I'm trying to get my head in it so I can block the sun out so we get this. But there's nothing about you that is a victim of trauma. If I'm allowed to say that, I should have asked permission before. To be fair, I've just realised. But Cheryl, there's nothing about you that sounds like there's any part of you that's a victim of trauma. But that understanding and awareness of I've had trauma in the past, and now I'm working
Mm.
through it. Is that the linguistics of that is so beautiful, Cheryl. It genuinely is, and
Yep.
that should give hope and relevance for anybody's like, well, that's where I am. I didn't really want to speak about it. Maybe I need to go and speak to Cheryl about those things. Now, what does a lot of people struggle with this one, and I'll even say my wife and things like that. What does and me as well, actually, what does forgiveness for you mean? A lot of people say, I would not forgive any fucker for doing that, to be fair. And I only speak how I can speak. To be fair,
Mm.
that's the way I speak. I have to tone it down when I got a new BNIs because I'm like I can't give them the full kitty yet because it is trash. Cheryl, what does forgiveness mean for you? Have you forgiven the gentleman, but you've not forgot because the forgiveness relinquishes
Yeah.
you of the. So explain forgiveness for Cheryl Smith, the leadership of the inner game.
Okay. So first of all, forgiveness is a journey. It's not something you just get to. And you know this because how many times have you said to somebody, I forgive you, but inside there's a part of you that doesn't forgive. And so even when somebody says, I forgive and I don't forget, I'm like, with all due respect, you're not forgiving. Because you are saying, I'm going to forgive you, but I'm going to hold on to the thing you did in my memory for the rest of my life, right? And that's okay. Like if that's where someone is, like that is still a really beautiful place, right? Forgiveness is an evolution. And so, the first place I had to come to was, can I forgive that this thing happened in the first place. Like almost like, can I just, it's almost like what I would call acceptance over forgiveness. It's like, can I just accept that somebody hurt me, right? Because the whole time I'm fighting that, trying to, like, that's what I did in the first 3 years. Nope, that didn't happen. Let me just pretend it didn't happen. And of course, like, we forget that emotions are in motion and they're designed to move through us. So the fact that I felt angry was a really normal human emotion.
Of course.
Like, but we don't do that. We don't forgive ourselves. We go, oh, I'm not allowed to be angry because what? Because society says you can't. Like, I was angry. Like, I was like tipping over furniture in my bedroom. That's how angry I was. And I wanted to do more than that. Like, I'm not gonna say I didn't be like, I want to go kill this guy. I want him to be harmed. I want this for him. And like, of course, all those thoughts went through my head. But I have to come to a place of forgiveness in terms of just an acceptance. Like, I forgive that this situation in its entirety occurred. And then I would get to a point where I realized that every single time I would either think about my trauma or speak about my trauma, there was such an element of still holding on.
Mm.
Like it was like an identity. Like, and like I have to laugh because I did actually used to say, hi, I'm Carolyn, just so you know. Just so you know, I was assaulted. Just so you know, I have mental illness. Just so you know. It was like the identity I was coming out into the world. So as I begin to forgive him, I start to release some of that identity. I just start to release that and I get to actually tap into truth of who I am because we are not the things that happen to us. Those are just things. Like we don't live in a world in which the outside world does something and it creates something in us. And we're fed this narrative through our education systems, through everything, and it just isn't true. How you see the world is how the world will appear to you. That's why two people can have the same experience and behave completely differently in it. It comes from in you. This is what I mean by it's an inner game. So for me, forgiveness was a much bigger inner thing, and it took me years. And I mean years. Like I'm not saying that I went to a therapist and talked it through. I went, I talked it through, I talked it through, I talked it through, I repeated it, I went back, I went forth. I'd have periods of feeling like, yeah, I've really forgiven, and then something would happen, and I'd be like, I have not forgiven. That still sits in my heart until one day, and it's not like some massive epiphany moment. I just realized, huh, that doesn't hurt me anymore. It doesn't hurt me anymore. So I could sit in front of you today, and I would not choose to do this, but I could sit and have a meal with this man and just hear his side of the story. I could genuinely do that at this point. Again, it wouldn't be
Oh,
a choice. It wouldn't be a
Cheryl.
choice. I could. I could. Do you know why? But here's why. Because, because, and exactly what I said, right? In my mental illness, for 15 years, I did things that hurt me. I engaged in eating disorders, I took overdoses, tried to drown myself. I would get into relationships with people who were no good for me and be like, yeah, this is all I deserve. I would sit and tell myself that I was the most worthless, awful, horrific human being. I would hold myself back from my potential. I wouldn't go for promotions. I almost got to a point where I almost lost my job because of my own behavior, because of the way I treated myself. Why did I treat myself that way? Nobody taught me to do that. Like my parents didn't bring me up to be like, go treat yourself like shit, right? Why did I do that? Because something had happened to me that had changed my neural pathways, that had created a narrative in my mind that had me feel a certain way. And like a child, I behaved on the back of that. And if that is true for me, that is also true for him. Because somebody who has a good, beautiful neurochemistry in their brain doesn't go out that and do that to other people. Now, I don't know what happened to him. I don't know why he did what he did, but I do know he wasn't born that way. That's not a thing. That isn't a thing. It's never been a thing.
Uh, the question I was going to ask before you answered it was, does forgiveness mean that if you had the opportunity to kick him in the balls when you walked past him If you were going down the same street, would you kick him in the balls? But you said no, you would go for wow. I mean, that's powerful, Cheryl. I mean, that's for anyone listening, watching, they're going to ask the question, what did you have to do to, and you've discussed it, to get to that place where you could sit down? And I mean, that, wow. Even I'm sat here going, not a fucking chance. I'd have kicked him in the balls. If anything had happened to my wife or anything like that, I wouldn't have that decorum. I just don't know. I don't know if that's a man thing. I don't know if that's a Cuddy thing, but I don't know if I could have that decorum. Is that decorum and that self-led leader that you have for yourself, does that bring you solace? Does that bring what does that bring you? Let me look at the smile, obviously.
Well, I was going to say, like, if you ask how I did that, we now get on to my favorite subject, which is leadership. I
Yeah,
led myself to it, and
perfect.
it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. Like, it's not like it was like years of back and forth of leaning into professionals, of accepting that, like, let me explain it this way. There are two forces that are at work in our lives in any given moment.
Mm,
There are what I call the mind stories. And the mind is only as good as a computer. It's like ChatGPT. Like what you feed the mind will come
absolutely.
out of the mind, right? So if I want to feed vitriol and hate and unforgiveness for this man, like I could do that and it would be totally understandable. However, I don't choose, and I do sometimes go there because I'm human, but I don't choose to live in my mind. I just don't. I lived in my mind for a lot of years and I was caged. I had a cap on my potential. I had a cap on everything in my life. So instead, and I can't remember who it is. There's a beautiful spiritual teacher that says the longest journey a human will ever take is the 30 centimeters from their head to their heart. So the other force at work is in your heart. And your heart is like it's pure love. And love is like love has no agreement, no attachment, no anything. It's completely and utterly like pure love in its greatest form is unconditional. Like anybody who's had a child will really know what love is. It's not I'll love them if they do this, if they do that. Like I can be frustrated by my child's behaviors, but I would love them no matter what. There's a real question as a parent, like if my child did something unforgivable, would I still love them? And the answer is always yes. I might find it hard to show that. I might not agree with the things they did, but I would still love them. And in the heart is our leadership. It's our unlimited potential. And as human beings, we are walking around the people I work with, they're like business owners that are like, I can only charge this much, or this is all that's possible for me. And I'm like, BS, that's created in your mind. That is created on data and the way that you see the world and what you've been told is true for you. It's not true. For something to be true, it has to be true at all times. And there is somebody out there who's doing something different to you, so therefore it isn't true. There are people who come through extraordinary circumstances. Like, read me a success story of somebody who's not overcome adversity. No success story is like, oh, well, I was just born this way and I just leapt through life and it was great and amazing and whatever. No, like, there was like real shit, real dirt, real in the arena stuff. And
There's
so,
there's an old adage which is so right and certainly fits, which is hard times make hard people. And we have to have that hard, and good times make soft people, or good times make weak people. And Cristiano Ronaldo, I'm not a football fan, but I actually do admire the guy because he's still playing. And he always says that I'm only good because I worked. He said attitude always works out talent. I just had the attitude to do it because of what was instilled in me from his grandma and his mum in Portugal way back in the day. And they were poor and back streets of Portugal. And it really, really is. And you'll hear it, Cheryl, all the time when you talk to people and, yeah, I can't do this because of this, and this. And I, it is, to be fair, how do you, going from the space that you have, because this, I think this is actually a cool question, going from the space that you've had, the journey that you had, how do you keep your mouth non-responsive when you can hear somebody's bullshit and you're not it, then they're not coming to you for the coaching? But how is that why you like sitting on your own? Because you said I actually like my own space. Because I'll be honest, I'm starting to really like my own space because I can't sometimes listen to other people's stories in business
Okay.
and work. So I'm like, well, how does Cheryl do this? Because I'm going to take a nugget away from this one.
So, first of all, I don't always. I don't like, like I'm a human being, right? And listen, the people who are really, really close to me, and I mean the people who see every aspect of me, they see a very different version of me, and they see those mind stories play out. My clients professionally, like that's never shared. But, I'll often use the stories as a way to say, because if my clients are caught up, they're, oh, I'm really caught up in this mind story, and they're judging themselves. And I'm like, hey, listen, let me tell you about the stupid thing I did at the weekend when I like did something and I was completely caught up about it. Or let me tell you about, the fact that, I love my mum to bits, but I don't know why, but she triggers me for some reason. I don't know why. Like I just don't know why. And it doesn't matter how much work
Your
I
mum
do.
triggers you.
Yeah, like but like not in a bad way, but just in a way of like the like she'll frustrate me sometimes. And I'm like, and I don't tend to get frustrated with other people out in the world. Why is it my mum? And it's like, well, because there's still a little 3-year-old girl who wants her mum's attention and approval. And when I don't get it, I still feel a certain type of way. I still have mind stories, right? I do
Yeah.
not sit in front of you somebody, some enlightened guru on a pillow that's like, I forgive everybody, and I'm totally got you ask my ex-partner, he'll be like, I'll tell you the other side of Cheryl Smith, right? Like it's a totally different story, right? But so first of all, the reason I can listen to other people is because I am other people. Like I get caught up in my stories, so who am I to judge? And also, massive thing that happened for me was I worked with a coach when I was still working in the NHS, a brilliant guy called Sinan. And I remember saying to him, I'm just struggling with other people. I said, I go and sit in my staff room and everybody's complaining. Now, I don't sit at the table of complaint. I don't care for it, honestly. I'm like, I know the government's doing something. The government's been doing something from the day the government began, right? I was like, I know that there's things going on in the economy. That's what happens. It's going to go up and it's going to go down. It's been doing that since the economy began. I know that there are people out there who are doing things that frustrate us. I know that BMW drivers don't use their indicators. I know all these things, right? I have the
Neither do
same
Kia
frustrations as
drivers because I drive a
you,
Kia.
right? But like, I know all these things, right? But what does sitting in this conversation, like, tell me what value is found in this conversation? And because, I very much work in a growth mindset, I'm like, where are we going? Like, where are we limiting ourselves with this? Like the whole time I'm complaining about the government is getting to win. So I'm like, I'm just not going to complain about you. You can go have your cheese and wine party. I'm too busy over here leading a fabulous life and I'm not letting you take any of my energy, right? But how do I do that? I literally said to him, I said, it's just a table of complaint. And I go into the staff room and everybody's just moaning. And he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, Cheryl Smith, until you can sit in that room and not hear complaining, you have work to do. He pointed out that I was the problem. Right now, again,
Yeah.
I did not like that. Right now, I'm not going to say that he said that to me and then my mind changed. Like something
No.
happened when we have an insight, we catch something. So I would then every week go and sit in my staff room and listen to people. And it took a while. After a few months, I started to hear something very, very different. And here's what I heard, right? So one person was complaining about the organization. And all of a sudden, I didn't hear them complaining about the organization. I heard someone say, there are things that are getting in my way of using the gifts that I have, and that frustrates me. Someone else was complaining about their husband. And again, instead of hearing somebody complain about their husband, I heard a woman who was like, I really love my husband, And sometimes I don't feel loved by him, and I wish he could hear me. Someone else was complaining about their children. And again, I didn't hear them complaining about their children. I started to hear they're like, I want the best for my children. And all of a sudden, I realize that what sounds like complaint is actually love. Like we are always seeking, no matter how self-aware or not self-aware we are always seeking to return to that state of being. And then now I have a much bigger capacity to hear the complaint. And sometimes I don't. Like if I'm caught up, I have to regroup and go talk to a mentor or be on my own or go for a walk. But actually, I can suddenly hear that people are not caught up as I used to think. They're just searching for the same thing I'm searching for. And perhaps as a coach, as a mentor, I can actually really hear them and then offer them something that might help them to turn a light on in a different way.
Yeah, that's very true. And I remember way back in the day when I was in my downward spiral, I used to be that person that would say it's not me that's the problem, it's all these 100 people that are annoying and triggering me. And that's when I started learning out about victim mindset, which is if I'm allowing other people to affect my emotional state, that's a me problem, not a them problem.
Yeah.
And that's when we take our power back. That's when we go up the consciousness scale. Then we start realizing, well, actually, if I change me, then it's going to be a lot easier than changing the 100 people around me to serve my needs. And that was a really powerful mindset change for me back in the day. But it's funny that the more we learn how to listen and not speak, the more we can hear the complaints and the more. But you're absolutely right. Once you listen to the undertones, because it's funny, one of my trainings is slap training. So if we change our story, our language, our association, our physicality, we'll change our emotional states. So understanding what that story is telling them exactly is takes you away from that negative connotation and the complaining. This has been a fascinating conversation, Cheryl. And I knew that the instant I met you. I knew that. And I said straight away, just jump on a podcast because there's got to be stories of people who have gone through what you've gone through and then in the place. So it gives that hope. How, if somebody had come along to you, there's an old adage that we don't listen to, the Buddha doesn't flower until we're ready to listen. So the Buddha doesn't appear because he was born in a lily until we're ready to hear.
Yes.
So on your journey, what was the tipping point that you were ready to listen? So somebody else going through that, because there's always going to be someone around. And I know I'm like, there was something happened yesterday with my wife. My wife was saying something about somebody else, and I was like, don't forget that's a trauma response. She just doesn't know. So we don't want to judge because that's the nervous system. Fair enough. That's why they've got the behaviors. So we pull back and just, until they're ready to want to come and talk or anything like that. Oh, I didn't know that. I said, yeah, crazy behavior. There's a trauma response there. No one's just born crazy. It's just no. There'll be something that's gone along. So we want to, you know what, they'll pat me back. So I actually wasn't right in the moment. We were like, no, let's pull back. We don't need to. But for you, Cheryl, what was when the answers are all around us all time, but we don't want to listen because we don't know. What was the tipping point for you? Just to wrap up this conversation, when did you know you were ready to go, right, it's therapy or it's coaching? When did you know? What was the tipping point?
Such a good question. First of all, I would say that there's no such thing as being ready. Honestly,
Yeah.
like I, we are always seeking to heal, like without even knowing we're doing it. So like even the eating disorders, the like if you think about it, I was just trying to step back into my own leadership and control the situation.
Mm.
Another important part of this is I have always maintained. So, someone once said to me in nursing, like, I'm not judgment, like, there's a bit of a thing where people would come in with like drug addiction or something, and people would say things about them. And I remember the substance misuse nurses, like, you're like the least judgmental nurse I've ever met. Like, you really don't judge these people. I said, because I know that were it not for my support network and my intelligence, my story would have played out very, very differently. So I do not judge somebody else's coping strategy. I never have, and I never will. I might not be available for a projected behavior onto myself, but equally, I just get, like you say, it's a trauma response, so I don't judge. Um, I was always seeking a solution. So the minute I sat in front of a psychiatrist and they said, it's this, and this is what we need to do, I went. Now, it doesn't mean that I found it easy. I used to have a friend who used to drag me to my psychology appointment because I didn't want to go and talk about something that I was trying desperately to forget, you know? Um, so I went through therapy for years. A massive turning moment for me was um, I was in the middle of I don't know how many mental breakdowns I had over those years. It was many. But I was in the middle of one. I was up for it. And I woke up one morning and I had a single thought. And it was just that I don't want to do this anymore. Now, I'd had that thought in a really destructive, self-harming type of way. But my next thought was really interesting to me. And the thought was this: I'm doing this. It's like, I'm doing this. And again, it's like I movie reeled my life and I could just suddenly see how my identity was one of a victim, one of someone who'd had a trauma, one of somebody who had mental illness. So, instead of sitting in the ownership of my leadership, my success, like the brilliance, like the work I do with people changes lives, and I'm not just getting started with the millions of people it's going to support. That's who I am. But it was like, instead of owning that, I was like, hi, I'm Cheryl, and I'm quite good at this. But just so you know, here's all my problems. And this is who I am. And after that, I read an incredible book by a man named Michael Neill called The Inside Out Revolution, which I recommend to anybody who is
Say that again because the sound's gone off and that sounds like a good book. Say that again.
yeah.
The
So
Inside Out.
Michael Neill, The Inside Out Revolution. And essentially, it is just a beautiful guide to how the world is not as it is, it's how we perceive it. So,
Yeah.
you know, if I identify with success, if I identify with, whatever it is you're looking for in your life, like wealth, health, impact, like if you identify with that, you will show up to that life and you will create results that, a lot of people have followed my journey on social media. This is all documented. I started sharing in 2020. They have followed from knowing me as a woman who was like successful in an NHS career to now flying around the world, speaking on stages. They're like, how did this woman become this person? It's like, well, I was never not that woman. I just didn't identify as that. I identified as the failure, as those things. So that insight got me into such a state of curiosity around how when we change the way we look at things, they change. Such a state of curiosity. And that has been my path ever since. That's what led me into coaching. And that's how I work with people. And this is where I say leadership is an inner game because just wanting something for your life, wanting to be healed of the stuff that holds you back isn't enough. You have to lead yourself to say, at what point have I had enough? And I after 15 years was like, this is BS. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be the woman who, you know, lives a half fulfilled life. Was like, I want to go change lives. Like, let's go do that. And so if I can just admit that there are things in my heart that I desire that are there not by accident. Again, I will say this, the heart stories, they are as unique as a fingerprint. None of us have the same vision for our life. If I just own this is what I want for my life, and the only person holding me back from that is me. It's not the government, it's not the economy, it's not your boss, it's not what happened to you. Those are just circumstances. I read a book of anybody successful. I do not hear somebody who had it easy. I hear somebody who chose something different despite of the circumstances every single time. That level of leadership will take anybody and you can leap a level. You could literally go, like, if I knew now what I knew back then, I would have become an overnight success.
Mm,
Don't let it take you as long as it took me. That's crazy.
yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. What a fabulous story. I mean,
Thank you.
genuinely, the ups and downs of life, and to where you are now has to be an inspiration for so many, which is why I wanted to get this. It's a prime example of if it's in the mind, it can be managed. If it's in the mind, it can be managed. And I
Mhm.
often talk a lot about identity and those kind of things, um, and past traumas and our new traumas, and our nervous system just wants to keep us protected and things like that. But leadership isn't in a game. You've proved that, Cheryl. You've proved that on the journey and the story that you've shared, and clearly you're very high on the consciousness scale, as we like to climb. It's a powerful thing. Is there anything else you want to share before we wrap up? Some final nuggets from Cheryl Smith.
Like the repeated thing I see, now you have to remember my coaching actually began with coaching people who were in the situation I was in. So the minute I started sharing my journey online, I had multiple people reach out to me and either share that they'd experienced a trauma. So I kind of started off as a mental health coach, and then very quickly, once somebody moves through their mental health, they start to go, well, if I could do anything with my life, why am I doing what I'm doing? I'm in a job I hate. I don't like doing this. I'm going to go change my life. So then it became more of the life coaching. Then, because I did so well in my business so quickly, I started adding in the strategy of business. And now I just call it leadership coaching because honestly, like once you tap into your highest level of leadership, everything is possible. Like so I would leave it at this, like, so wherever you are in that, right? Like maybe you're like so identified with the things that have happened to you, you are on the verge of a breakthrough and your life can change in a single moment. My life changed in a single moment. Look in yours. And
Ah,
if you are, maybe like you're in this work, like you listen to this podcast regularly and things like this, and you know, the things I'm saying are not things that you haven't heard before, but you're still not where you want to be, then your next level of leadership is going to take you there. And maybe you are a successful person. Maybe you've achieved a lot of what you want to achieve, but you're like, I know there's more within me. Like all of that is accessed through leadership, through just realizing it's a better question is not to say, can I do that? Don't ever ask yourself, can I do it? Ask yourself, how can I do that? Now you're going to open up a completely different pathway, completely different question. It's all possible. There's no such thing as impossible. You just have to accept, I just haven't figured out how to do it yet. So wherever you are, just because you haven't figured it out doesn't mean you're not going to. And that for me right there, the ability to lead yourself into that level of self-inquiry is the difference between someone who's frustrated in an area in their life and someone who's so fucking happy that it radiates from them.
absolutely fantastic. Ask better questions, get better answers. It's a phenomenal mindset change for everybody, especially the inner game of leadership as well. You're absolutely right. And on that bombshell, if it's in the mind, it can be managed. And this was a prime example of that from start to finish. If you're liking the channel so far, you're enjoying the content, like and subscribe. And don't hesitate, the Cheryl's details are going to be on there. Reach out, get in contact. If Cheryl's the coach for you, please reach out to her, speak to her. And if Cuddy's the coach for you, absolutely reach out, get in contact, because that's what we're here for, to make sure that people have the tools for success and confidence and living the life on their terms, to be fair. As always, big love from Cuddy, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Mind Management Mentors.